Teresa Watson was 66 years old that spring, and she had just buried a husband of 43 years. It's simpler this way, Mom. That was Erica, sliding a stack of paper across her own father's kitchen table 2 weeks after the funeral. Vincent read the numbers out loud like he was doing her a favor. $310,000. The house, sold. The joint accounts, closed, split clean between the two of them, and not $1 of it kept back for her. What was left for Teresa was a suitcase and a rusted-out signal tower on Jeremy Creek Road that nobody in the family had ever wanted. She signed where they told her to sign. Then she drove out there alone, walked straight to her late father's old ship's map table, and knelt down in front of it like she already knew what she was looking for. She did not know. Not yet. But let's go back to the funeral and the 2 weeks after it, because that is where this really starts. Gerald Watson died on a Tuesday in January, 69 years old, quiet in his sleep, the way he'd always said he wanted to go. Teresa sat beside the casket 3 days running and did not cry where anyone could see her. She had learned that from her father a long time ago. You grieve on your own time, in your own house, where nobody gets to watch. The family meeting happened on a Saturday. Vincent picked the date. He always picked the date. "We just want this handled clean, Mom," he said, setting a leather folder on the table like a man opening a store. "No fighting over it later. That's all we want." Anthony Serrano sat at the head of the table, which was not his table. He had married into this family 14 years back, that sold real estate the whole time, and had never once, in Teresa's hearing, called a house a home. He called it inventory. "The market's soft right now," Anthony said, tapping a page. "We moved fast on the listing before it got softer. $267,000 for the house. That's a good number, Teresa. That's a real good number for this street." "You sold the house," Teresa said. "It's already sold," Erica said. "Not unkind, exactly. Just final, the way you'd tell someone a train had already left. Closed Thursday. And the joint accounts, Dad's and yours, that's another $43,000. Anthony ran the math. 310 total. We split it, you and Dad's estate. That's how it works." "You split it between yourselves," Teresa said. "I heard the number. I didn't hear my name in it." Vincent had the grace to look at the folder instead of at her. "There's a signature page in there, Mom. You already signed the power of attorney back when Dad first got sick, remember? So we could keep the bills moving. We used that to close things out quick. Save you the headache." She did remember signing it. 18 months back, in a hospital hallway, with Gerald down the corridor hooked to machines, and her hand shaking so bad the notary had to steady the clipboard for her. She had signed a lot of things that year without reading past the first line. "So, all of it's already done," Teresa said. "All of it's already done," Anthony agreed. "Like that settled something. We didn't want you carrying paperwork on top of grief. That's not a kindness, making a woman your age sort through banks and title companies. A woman your age." She turned that phrase over once in her mind and set it down. She was 66, not senile, not blind, and she understood exactly what had just been done to her, in the careful, legal, unbreakable way it had been done. "There's one more thing," Erica said, and here her voice changed, went a little brighter. "The way people talk when they're handing you the bad news wrapped as good news. Grandpa Harold's old tower, out on Jeremy Creek. Since Dad's estate didn't touch that, it's still just yours, Mom. Nobody's taken that from you." "Nobody wanted it," Vincent said, and he laughed a little, short, like he couldn't help it. "It's not worth the paper the deed's printed on. County had it condemned years back. Grandpa's own insurance company wouldn't touch it in 2011. That's why it went to you, instead of getting sold with everything else. You remember, it got appraised for something like $8,000, total land and all. So you get the tower," Erica said, "and we split what's actually worth something. That's fair, right? Nobody's cheating anybody." Teresa looked at her daughter's face, and her son's face, and the face of the man her daughter had married, and she thought about how strange it was that all three of them believed, truly believed, that this was generosity. "Fair," Teresa repeated. "It's a hard time for everybody," Anthony said, standing, buttoning his jacket like the meeting was already a closed file. "You'll thank us later, when it's simple." She did not answer that. She picked up her suitcase, the one Erica had packed for her that morning, as though Teresa were the one leaving on a trip, and she walked out to her car. Nobody walked her to it. She drove the 2 hours to McClellanville with the radio off, past the marsh grass turning gold in the low sun, past the shrimp boats tied up along Jeremy Creek, and she did not decide to fight them. Not that day. Some things a person knows are not worth the years it would take to win them, and Teresa had already spent enough years handing pieces of herself over to people who called it simple. The tower was exactly as she remembered it, and exactly as they had described it. Rusted iron legs, a spiral stair, a square keeper's house bolted up near the top, where her father had lived for over 30 years, watching the shipping lane and the storms come in off Cape Roman. The Coast Guard had built it, decommissioned it, and forgotten it. And Harold Clark had bought the 4 acres underneath it in 1971, back when the government was selling off surplus land nobody thought would ever be worth a thing. Teresa let herself in with the same brass-toothed key she'd carried on her ring since 2011, since the year her father died, and left her this, and left her younger sister Nancy the house and the savings, because that had seemed fair too back then. Everyone had agreed the tower was worthless. 15 years later, her own children had done the math the exact same way. Inside, dust hung in the light coming through the gallery windows. Her father's cot was still made up in the corner, the way he'd left it. His ship's map table sat bolted to the floor in the center of the room. Wide oak, brass-cornered, chart drawers down one side, the kind of table a man builds once in his life and never needs to build again. Teresa set her suitcase down. She ran a hand along the table's edge, over grooves worn smooth by 40 years of her father's forearms. "Well, Dad," she said out loud, to nobody. "Looks like it's just us again." She pulled the top chart drawer open out of habit, the way she had 100 times as a girl, helping him fold nautical charts back into their slots. It stuck a little, the way it always had, then gave, empty mostly, except a few brittle survey maps curling at the corners. She went to push it shut and felt it catch again, low, against something that shouldn't have been there. Not the drawer's own runner, something underneath it. She knelt down and looked closer, and that was when she heard boots on the gravel outside, unhurried, like a man who'd walked this ground 1,000 times before. "Didn't figure you'd want to spend your first night out here alone," a voice called from the doorway. "So I brought a crowbar and a 6-pack in case you needed either one." Walter Hines stood in the frame with a canvas tool bag over one shoulder. 70 years old, sun-cured the way men get who've spent their whole lives on the water. He'd served beside Harold Clark for 20 years on this stretch of coast, and he still ran an oyster lease not 200 yards off the point. "Walter," Teresa said, and something in her chest loosened, just slightly, for the first time in 2 weeks. "How'd you know I was out here?" "Word travels fast on a creek this small," he said, setting the tool bag down by the door. "Especially when a landman's been driving that same stretch of road twice this week, asking folks at the bait shop who owns the old tower now." Teresa looked back down at the drawer that wouldn't quite close, then up at Walter. "A landman," she said slowly, "asking about this." "That's what I heard," Walter said. "Your daddy always did say that tower had more sitting under it than anybody bothered to look for. I never did know if he meant that as a figure of speech." Teresa looked down at the drawer, then back up at Walter. "A figure of speech," she said. "Or he really did mean it." Walter set his tool bag down slow, like a man settling in for something. Only one way to find out. "Give it here." He got down on one knee beside her, joints popping, and ran his thumb along the underside of the drawer where it had caught. Teresa watched his hand stop. "There's a seam here that don't belong," he said. "Feel that." She reached under and felt it too. A hairline gap running the width of the drawer bottom, a line that had no business being there in a piece of furniture her father built, with his own 2 hands out of good oak. "Harold built false bottoms into things," Walter said. "Learned it in the service, I always figured. Man spends 30 years signaling ships where not to run aground. He gets particular about what's hidden and what isn't." Teresa pressed her fingers flat against the seam and pushed. Nothing. She tried the edges, found a notch cut into the back corner, barely wide enough for a fingernail, and when she hooked it and pulled, the false bottom lifted clean out of the drawer like a lid off a box. Neither of them said anything for a second. Inside lay a single brass key, small, old, gone dark with age, and folded beside it a scrap of paper gone soft and brown at the creases. Teresa lifted the paper first, her father's handwriting. She would have known it anywhere, that slant to the left, the way he crossed his sevens like they'd taught him in the service. She read it out loud, because Walter was right there, and because some things a person needs to hear said in the air before they'll believe it. The light never really went dark, she read. Look under her feet. Walter took his cap off. He did that sometimes, she remembered, when something needed a minute of quiet respect before anybody talked over it. Under her feet, he repeated. Under whose feet? I don't know, Teresa said. Could mean the tower, could mean me, could mean the light itself, Walter said. That old beacon up top hasn't turned since the Coast Guard shut this place down. Harold used to say a light don't go dark just because somebody flips the switch off. Said it just goes quiet. Teresa turned the key over in her palm. Small, brass, the kind of key that belonged to a lock no bigger than a jewelry box or a drawer or something built into furniture rather than a door. This table, she said slowly. Dad built it with his hands. He'd know every inch of it. If he wanted to hide something else, he wouldn't have to look far. She ran her palm along the pedestal leg at the corner of the table, the same way she'd run it along the drawer edge, feeling for a seam that didn't belong. Walter got down and did the same on the other side. Nothing here I can find, he said after a minute. But that don't mean nothing. Harold didn't hide things so a man could find them in 10 minutes on his knees. He hid things so they'd still be there in 50 years. Then I've got 50 years worth of looking to catch up on, Teresa said. And for the first time in 2 weeks, something in her voice came close to a laugh. She wrapped the key in the note and set both inside the front pocket of her handbag, careful, the way she'd have carried an egg. She didn't know yet what had opened. She didn't tell Walter that she already intended to find out before she slept that night, table leg or no table leg, and she suspected he already knew it without her saying. You eaten today? Walter asked, standing, knees cracking again. Not since this morning. Then I'm going to go fetch us something from the shrimp shack before it closes. And you're going to sit down on that gallery and not climb around this tower alone in the dark looking for hidden compartments. Deal? Deal, Teresa said, though she had no real intention of sitting still. Walter was barely out the door and down the gravel drive when Teresa heard a second set of tires crunch up behind his truck. She stepped to the window, expecting him circling back for something forgotten. Instead, she saw a car she didn't know. Dark sedan, dust-caked from the dirt roads out here, and a man in a collared shirt stepping out of it with a folder under his arm, same as the folder Vincent had carried into her kitchen 2 weeks back, and something in her went tight at the sight of it before he'd said a single word. Afternoon, the man called up toward the tower. You'd be Teresa Watson? Depends who's asking, Teresa said, coming out onto the gallery. Marcus Brady. He said it easy, like a name that opened doors on its own. I do land acquisitions for Palmetto Tideline Holdings. We're a coastal development group, work up and down this stretch from Georgetown to Awendaw. I understand you just came into ownership of this property. I came into it 15 years ago, Teresa said. It's not new. Right, of course. Ownership's clean, though. That's what matters to us. He smiled, the kind of smile that had been practiced in front of a mirror more than it had been felt. I'll be straight with you, Mrs. Watson. This is a hard sell for most folks in your position. Old structure, no real access road to speak of, sits out here on its own, past the point where the county even keeps the pavement up. I'm aware, Teresa said. My son told me the same thing 2 weeks ago. Called it worthless. Well, Marcus laughed a little, shifted his folder to his other arm. Worthless is a strong word. We think there's something here. Not much, but something. We'd be prepared to offer you $40,000, cash. Quick close, no repairs needed on your end. We take it as is. $40,000. Teresa stood very still on the gallery and let that number sit in the air a second before she answered it. 40,000, she said. For a condemned tower on 4 acres of marsh nobody can build on. Coastal land's a funny thing, Marcus said. Sometimes it's worth more to the right buyer than it looks on paper. We like the location. Simple as that. The location? Teresa repeated. That's right. She looked past him at his sedan, still ticking as it cooled, then back at his face, which had gone just slightly too smooth, too rehearsed. The face of a man who'd driven 2 hours down a dirt road on a hunch and was hoping she wouldn't ask him what the hunch was. Mr. Brady, she said, nobody drives out on a road like this one, on a Tuesday with a folder and a cash offer for a piece of land that's worth nothing. I may be 66 years old and I may have just buried my husband, but I haven't lost my arithmetic. Something flickered behind his eyes, gone as fast as it came. It's just a preliminary number, Mrs. Watson. Company likes to move fast on these things before somebody else does. That's all it is. Before somebody else does what? Teresa said. Before the market shifts, Marcus said. Too quick. He reached into his folder and produced a card, held it out to her. Think it over. No pressure. Number's good through the end of the month if you want to take it. Teresa didn't reach for the card. He set it down on the porch rail instead and led himself back to his car, and she watched him go. Watched the dust rise up gold behind his tires all the way back out to Jeremy Creek Road, and she did not move until the sound of his engine had faded past the tree line. She picked up the card once he was gone. Marcus Brady, Palmetto Tideline Holdings, a phone number, an address in Charleston. She was still standing there holding it when Walter's truck came back up the drive, paper sacks of shrimp riding on the seat beside him. He got out, took one look at her face, and stopped in the yard. Who was that? He said. Saw a car pulling out same time I was pulling in. Landman, Teresa said. Offered me $40,000 for this place. Walter's eyebrows went up slow. $40,000 for a condemned tower. That's what I said to him. What did he say back? Said it was the location, Teresa said. Said it quick, like he'd practiced saying it and didn't much believe it himself. Walter set the shrimp sacks down on the porch rail next to the card Marcus had left. He picked the card up, turned it over, read the company name twice like he was making sure he had it right. Palmetto Tideline, he said. I know that name. They bought up 2 parcels down past Awendal last year, tore out the old net houses, put in a marina, paid folks a fraction of what that land turned out worth once the permits came through. So, they know something, Teresa said. Or they think they do, Walter said. He set the card down again, careful, like it might bite. Your daddy's note is sitting in your handbag telling you to look under somebody's feet. And not an hour later, a man from a development company drives 2 hours down a dirt road to offer you $40,000 for a piece of land his own company called worthless a decade back when they were buying up the coast cheap. I don't believe in a whole lot of coincidence, Teresa. Never have. Teresa looked down at the brass key through the fabric of her handbag, and then out at the marsh going gold in the last of the light. And for the first time since she'd driven out here with nothing but a suitcase, she understood that whatever was waiting inside that pedestal leg, it was not going to be nothing. Neither do I, she said. Not anymore. They ate the shrimp cold, standing up at the map table because neither one of them wanted to sit down and pretend this was a night for sitting down. Teresa unwrapped the paper packet, and the smell of butter and Old Bay filled the room, mixing in with the dust and the salt air coming through the gallery windows. Walter ate standing too, one hand braced on the table edge, looking down at that hollow pedestal leg like it might say something if he stared at it long enough. You gonna eat, or you gonna stand there worrying a hole in the floor? Teresa said. I can do both, Walter said, and took another shrimp. She finished first. She always had, even as a girl, and her father used to tease her about it. Said she ate like she was racing the tide. She wiped her hands on a paper napkin and got down on her knees in front of the table's near leg, the one closest to the window, and ran her palms down its length the way Walter had shown her on the drawer. Nothing. Smooth oak, brass banding at the foot, a leg built the same as any table leg she'd ever seen. Try the other one, Walter said. Table like this, 4 legs, but only one of them's likely hollow. A man doesn't weaken his own furniture for sport. She moved around to the far leg, the one nearest the cot where her father used to sleep, and knelt again. This one had a scuff worn into the brass banding low near the floor, a mark that didn't match the others. She pressed her thumb against it and felt something her fingers had missed the first time. A hairline gap, same as the drawer, running around the leg just above the foot, thin as a pencil line. Walter. He was down beside her before she finished saying his name, knees popping again, worse this time, and he didn't complain about it. He ran his own thumb over the seam, slow, like a man reading Braille. There, he said. Feel that ridge, right there where the banding meets the wood. That's not decoration. That's a lid. Teresa's hand was shaking a little when she reached into her handbag for the key. She hadn't expected that, the shaking, and she pressed her other hand flat against her knee to steady it before she tried the key in the seam. There was no keyhole she could see, nothing marked, nothing that looked like it wanted a key at all. Maybe it's not this leg, she said, and heard the disappointment creep into her own voice before she could stop it. "Hold on," Walter said. "Harold didn't build things with keyholes a stranger could spot from 3 feet off. Feel along the banding. There's got to be a give somewhere." She walked her fingers along the brass strip, pressing as she went, and near the back of the leg, hidden where the table's own shadow fell across it, she found a place where the metal gave under her thumb, just slightly, like a button that had gone stiff with age. She pressed harder. Something clicked, faint, deep inside the wood, and a thin section of the banding swung outward on a hinge no wider than a fingernail, revealing a small brass keyhole underneath, dark with 40 years of dust. Neither of them said anything for a second. "Well," Walter said finally, "I'll be." Teresa held the key up to the light first, like she wanted to look at it one more time before it stopped being just an object and became whatever it was about to become. Then she fitted it into the keyhole. It went in smooth, no resistance, like it had been oiled and waiting. She turned it. The click that came back was louder than the first one, a real mechanism giving way, and the whole panel of banding at the base of the leg swung open like a little door, and behind it, Teresa could see straight up into the hollow column of the table's own pedestal, a shaft of dark space running up inside the wood. "There's something in there," she said, and her voice had gone quiet. The way a person's voice goes quiet in a church or a hospital hallway. Some place where noise feels like it doesn't belong. "Don't reach blind," Walter said. "Get the flashlight off my belt there." She took it from him, clicked it on, and shone it up into the hollow leg. Metal caught the light back at her, dull and gray, a rectangular shape wedged up inside the column, maybe a foot long, sitting on some kind of shelf built into the wood to hold it steady. "It's a box," she said. "Metal box, sitting up in there like Dad built the whole table around it." "Maybe he did," Walter said. "Get it down easy. Whatever's held up in there 40 years isn't going to want to come out fast." Teresa reached up into the hollow leg, felt along the edges of the box with her fingertips first, testing for anything that might hold it fixed in place. It sat loose on its little shelf, resting there rather than fastened, and when she got both hands around it and pulled, it slid free with a soft grinding sound, dust sifting down past her wrists, and she drew it out into the light. It was heavier than its size suggested, a lead-colored tin, sealed shut along every seam with something that looked like solder, gone dull and pitted with age, but unbroken. No hinge, no latch. Somebody had closed this box for good and never meant to open it in a hurry. "Lord," Walter breathed, sitting back on his heels. "That's a proper seal, Teresa. That's not a man hiding his pocket watch. That's a man hiding something he didn't want touched by weather or water or time." Teresa held the box in both hands and felt its weight settle into her palms, and she thought of her father's hands, the same hands that had built this table, sealing this box shut and setting it up inside a leg he'd hollowed out just for this purpose, and doing it so carefully that it had sat here undisturbed for going on 40 years while 2 daughters grew up and married and buried people of their own. "We need to get this open," she said. "Tonight. I'm not waiting on this." "Agreed," Walter said. "But careful. Lead seal like that, somebody sweated solder around every seam of this thing. We go at it wrong, we could crush what's inside instead of freeing it." He was already up and moving toward his tool bag by the door, and he came back with a pair of tin snips and a flathead screwdriver worn down to a nub from years of use. Set it on the table, right there where the light's best. She set it down under the gallery window, where the last of the evening sun came slanting through, gold and low, catching the dull metal and making it look almost warm. Walter worked the screwdriver into the seam along one short edge, patient, working it in a half-inch at a time, prying rather than forcing, and Teresa stood over him with the flashlight steady, even though they didn't need it yet, because it gave her hands something to do besides shake. "Your daddy," Walter said, working the blade deeper, "used to tell me things out on the water sometimes. Things he never told anybody else, far as I know. I always figured that was because a man alone on a boat with another man for 20 years. Some things just come up. Things about the war. Things about your mother before she passed. But there was one thing he said to me, must have been 10, 12 years before he died, and I never did understand it until right now." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Walter, there's a piece of this coast that's mine, free and clear. And someday somebody's going to come around trying to tell me different, and when they do, I want to already have won. Walter looked up at her. I asked him what he meant by that. He just laughed and said, "Ask me again when it matters." The seam gave with a soft crack, lead flaking away in small gray curls, and Walter set the screwdriver down and worked his fingers into the gap instead, easing the lid up along its length. It came free all at once, a puff of stale air escaping from inside, air that had been sealed in that tin since before Vincent was born, since before Teresa herself had gray in her hair. Inside, wrapped in a square of oilcloth gone brittle and yellow, lay a folded set of papers, and on top of them, held down by nothing but its own weight, a single envelope with her name written across the front in her father's hand, Teresa. She didn't touch it right away. She stood there looking down into the box, the flashlight beam trembling slightly now, despite her best effort to hold it steady. And Walter took his cap off again, slow, and held it against his chest without being asked. "That's your name," he said quietly. "He wrote your name on it, not Nancy's. Yours." "I see that," Teresa said. She reached in and lifted the oilcloth package first, setting it aside on the table, and beneath it she could see more paper, official-looking, the kind of document with a raised seal stamped into one corner, old enough that the ink had gone brown at the edges. She unfolded the top sheet with 2 fingers, careful of it the way she'd have been careful of something alive, and read the heading printed across the top in old typewriter font. Warranty deed. Her breath caught somewhere in her throat. Below the heading, a legal description ran down half the page, full of words like point and bearing and thence. The kind of language she'd only ever seen on the paperwork Anthony had shoved across her kitchen table 2 weeks earlier, and near the bottom, a date, 1971. "Walter," she said, "this is a deed." He leaned in over her shoulder, and she watched his eyes move down the page, slow, and watched his face change as he read. The way a man's face changes when he understands something is bigger than he expected it to be. "That's the point," he said. "That's this point, Teresa. Right here, 4 acres, same as the county always said, was condemned. Your daddy's got a deed to it, a real one, dated 71. He straightened up, took a breath. "But your daddy died in 2011 owning this tower. Everybody always said the land under it belonged to the county, since after the storm. Since Hugo." "I know what everybody always said," Teresa said, and she set the deed down gently on the table, beside the envelope with her name on it, and looked at the second folded document still sitting in the box, and at the letter beneath it that she had not yet let herself touch. "I think that's exactly what somebody wanted us to keep believing." Walter didn't say anything. He just watched her hands, waiting. Teresa set the deed aside, careful not to let it fold back along its old creases, and reached for the second document. This one was thinner, a single sheet, typed, with a raised notary seal pressed into the corner, and a signature at the bottom in blue ink that had faded to the color of a robin's shell, gone pale and soft with time. She read the heading out loud, because her voice needed something to do besides shake. Affidavit of Continued Ownership. She looked up at Walter. 1989. "Hugo," Walter said. "That's the year Hugo came through." "I know what year Hugo came through," Teresa said. And there was no heat in it, just the plain fact of a woman who had lived on this coast her whole life and didn't need reminding. She read on, her finger tracking under the lines, the way she used to read contracts before Gerald got sick and stopped letting her look at anything financial at all. "Says here the original recorded deed for the parcel described above was lost or destroyed when the county records room flooded during the storm of September 1989. Says the undersigned, Harold Clark, appeared before a notary and swore that he held clear title to the land described, that the loss of the recorded copy did not extinguish his ownership, and that he was executing this affidavit to preserve his claim, pending proper refiling." "Pending," Walter repeated. "That word's doing a lot of work." "He never refiled it," Teresa said. She set the affidavit down next to the deed, laid them edge to edge like 2 pieces of the same broken plate, and for a second, neither of them said anything, because the shape of what that meant was starting to come together in the quiet, the way water finds a low place in the yard, slow and then all at once. "Why wouldn't he refile it?" Walter said. "Man goes to the trouble of getting himself notarized after a hurricane, gets a lawyer or a clerk to witness it, and then he just sits on it. 40 years is not a man forgetting where he put something." "I don't know," Teresa said. but I think that's what the letter's going to tell me. She hadn't touched the envelope yet. It had been sitting there the whole time, propped against the edge of the box where she'd set it, her name in her father's hand, looking up at her like it had been waiting on her to finish with the paperwork first, the way Harold himself always made her finish her chores before she got to do the thing she wanted to do. Walter stood up from his knees, slow, one hand braced on the table edge, and for a moment she thought he was going to say something about giving her privacy, about stepping outside onto the gallery and letting her read it alone. He didn't. He pulled the other chair over instead, the one with the cracked cane seat that had sat empty in the corner since she'd arrived, and he sat down across from her at the map table, like a man settling in for a watch he intended to stand all the way through. "You don't have to read that by yourself," he said, "whatever it says." Teresa looked at him for a second, this man who had shown up with a truck full of tools before she had asked for a single thing, who had eaten cold shrimp standing over a hollow table leg, because neither one of them could sit still, and something in her chest loosened just slightly. The first give she'd felt since the day Vincent had slid that paperwork across her kitchen table and told her it would keep things simple. "No," she said. "I don't suppose I do." She opened the envelope. The paper inside was thin, the kind that used to come in a ream from the hardware store, and the ink had gone brown the way old ink does, but the hand was steady, block letters, a signalman's hand, a man who had spent half his life writing weather reports that needed to be read fast and right the first time. She read it out loud. She hadn't planned to, but it felt wrong somehow to read her father's last words to herself, in a whisper, in her head, with Walter sitting 3 feet away holding his own breath. Teresa. If you're reading this, then either I finally got around to telling you myself and changed my mind about the surprise, or I ran out of time, and knowing me, it's the second one. Her voice caught there. Walter didn't move, didn't reach for her hand, just sat with his elbows on his knees and let her have the moment. She kept reading. "The point under this tower is mine. Bought and paid for in 1971, cash, at a federal surplus sale, back when the government didn't want it, and nobody with any sense thought 4 acres of Marsh's Edge was worth the tax bill. I built this table with my own hands the year I came off active duty, and I built it to hold what mattered, same as I built the beacon to hold a light. Some things you put where the weather can't get at them. Then Hugo came. You girls were young, Nancy barely walking good, and I was out here alone most weeks running the light, while your mother kept the 2 of you in town. The storm took the roof off the courthouse records room, and half the deeds recorded before 1980 went under 3 feet of water and mud. County didn't have the money or the will to sort it all back out proper. What I heard from men I trusted was that anything unrecorded or storm damaged that nobody came forward loud enough about, the county was quietly folding into what they called surplus, not stealing it outright, just letting it go unclaimed long enough that it became theirs by default, and calling it tidy. Teresa stopped reading for a second. She looked at Walter. He knew, she said. He knew what they were doing. "Keep going," Walter said, quiet. "I went and had this affidavit sworn," she read, "because a piece of paper with a notary's seal on it is worth more in a courtroom than a man's word, even an honest man's. But I did not refile it with the county. I want you to understand why, because I've turned it over in my head more nights than I can count. And I never did decide if I was right. I had 2 little girls and a wife who worried herself sick every time I so much as squinted at a storm cloud, and I did not have the money to fight a county government in court if they decided to make trouble over a survey line or a lost deed book. Men who go up against the county over land like this, out here, they can lose slower and worse than men who just wait. I decided to wait. I decided to sit on what was mine, keep the tower standing, keep paying what little tax they ever bothered to send a bill for, and someday, when I had the money or the years or the nerve, finish the job myself and get it properly recorded again, clean, so nobody could ever come round asking. I did not get around to it. I want to tell you that plain, because I don't want you thinking there was some clever plan behind the waiting. There wasn't. There was a man who kept the light running and raised 2 girls and buried a wife and just never found the year where fighting the county for a piece of paper felt more urgent than everything else in front of him. Teresa had to stop again. She pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth for a second, and Walter reached over then, not for her hand, just laid 2 fingers on the edge of the table near her, close enough to be a presence without being an intrusion. She kept reading. "Why you, and not your sister? I want to say this careful, Because I loved Nancy same as I loved you, and I don't want this letter used against her memory of me after I'm gone. But you were the one who kept coming back. Every summer, every refit, every time that beacon needed a lens cleaned, or a housing repainted, or a battery bank replaced, you were the one who drove out here in your work clothes and put your hands in the grease with me. Nancy came for Christmas, and she came when I was sick, and that's not nothing. But this tower and this point, they were never her inheritance to want. They were yours before I ever wrote a will, because you're the one who already knew what it cost to keep a light burning out here. I trust you to finish what I started. I trust you to go and get this recorded proper, and make it yours in the eyes of the law, same as it's always been yours and mine. There's a key with this letter, or there was, if the years haven't swallowed it up somehow. It opens the leg you're standing over right now. Everything you need is inside. Go to somebody in Charleston who knows land law and old deeds, somebody who won't be scared off by a county that likes things tidy. And Teresa. Don't let anybody rush you into signing away a single acre of this before you understand exactly what it's worth. Not the county, and not anybody else, whoever they turn out to be. Your father, who is prouder of you than he ever said enough out loud. Harold. Teresa set the letter down on the table, flat, both hands pressed on either side of it like she was holding it in place against a wind that wasn't there. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Out past the gallery windows, the marsh had gone the deep blue color it turned right before full dark, and somewhere out on the water, a shrimp boat's running lights blinked once, twice, and kept going toward the inlet. Well, Walter finally said, and his voice had gone rough, now I understand the arithmetic he was talking about. Teresa looked down at the 3 documents laid out in front of her, the deed and the affidavit and the letter, and thought of Anthony's voice at her kitchen table, quick and smiling, telling her it would keep things simple for Mom. She thought of Marcus Brady's card sitting on the porch rail where he'd left it. $40,000 for a piece of land he wouldn't say why his company wanted. He told me not to let anybody rush me, she said. He wrote that 40 years before Anthony ever met my daughter, and it still fits him like he was standing in my kitchen. Some things don't change much on this coast, Walter said. Storms, tides, and men who want something for less than it's worth. Teresa gathered the papers, careful, and slid them back into the oilcloth, wrapping the way her father had left them, and set the whole bundle inside the tin box instead of the hollow leg. She wasn't ready to seal anything back up in a wall, not tonight. I need a lawyer, she said. Not just any lawyer, somebody who knows old land, old deeds, somebody who's dealt with a county before and won. She looked at Walter. You said Palmetto Tideline bought land down past Awendaw. You said folks got a fraction of what it turned out to be worth. That's what I heard, Walter said. Then I need to know what this is actually worth before anybody else decides that number for me, Teresa said. And I think I know somebody who might be able to point me toward a name in Charleston who'd take this seriously. She was thinking of Cynthia Blair, the woman from the Historical Society who'd recorded her father talking into a tape machine 30 years back. Stories about the tower and the light and the coast the way it used to be. Stories Teresa herself had only half listened to, as a younger woman with her own house and her own children pulling at her time. Walter was already nodding before she finished the thought. Cynthia'll know who to call, he said, and she'll know if there's anything in that old recording of your daddy's that backs up what's sitting on this table. Teresa looked out at the dark coming down over the marsh, at the light from the map table's lamp throwing gold across the deed and the affidavit and the space where the letter had been, and for the first time since Gerald's funeral, since the folder full of papers with her own signature already on them, she felt something that was not grief and was not fear either. It felt, she thought, like standing at the base of a ladder her father had built for her a long time ago, and finally understanding what it led up to. Tomorrow, she said, first thing, we go see her. I loaded the truck with the tin box wrapped in a dish towel, set it on the floorboard between my feet where I could keep one hand on it the whole ride, and Walter drove us into McClellanville with the windows down and the marsh grass leaning the same direction the whole way, like it was pointing us where to go. The Historical Society sat in an old cotton warehouse near the creek, brick gone soft and pink with age, a hand-lettered sign in the window that said, "Open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. Cynthia Blair was behind the front desk when the bell over the door rang, 74 years old and small, in a cardigan too heavy for July, glasses pushed up into gray hair that had probably been that same shortcut for 30 years. She looked up, and her face did something I wasn't ready for. It softened all at once, the way a face does when it's been waiting on someone without knowing it. Teresa Clark, she said. Lord, I haven't said that name out loud in years. It's Watson now, isn't it? It is, I said. Or it was. I heard about Gerald, she said. I'm sorry, I truly am. Then her eyes moved past me to Walter, and something in her face eased further, like his presence answered a question she hadn't asked yet. Walter Hines. Well, if the two of you are standing in my doorway together on a Tuesday morning, I expect this isn't a social call. No, ma'am, Walter said. It isn't. I set the towel-wrapped box on the counter between us and folded the cloth back, slow, the way you'd unwrap something that might still be breathing. Cynthia looked down at the deed on top, the old typewriter lettering, the date in the corner, and I watched her read it the same way Walter had, the way her breath caught partway through. Where did this come from? She said. My father's map table, I said. There's a hollow leg under the pedestal. Walter and I found it yesterday. There's a key and a note, and this. I nodded at the box. Deed, dated 1971, an affidavit from '89, and a letter he wrote me and never sent. Cynthia didn't touch the papers yet. She just looked at them a long moment, and then she looked up at me, and her eyes had gone bright behind her glasses. I recorded your father talking about this, she said. I recorded him in this building, right back there in the reading room, 1994. 2 hours of tape. I always wondered why he stopped short of finishing that part of the story. My chest went tight. You have a recording of him? I have every recording anybody in this county ever let me make, Cynthia said, already coming around the counter, already reaching for a ring of keys on her belt. Come on back. I want you to hear this before we say another word about what that paper means. The reading room was small, one long table, a window looking out on the creek, a reel-to-reel machine sitting on a metal cart like it had been waiting there on purpose. Cynthia threaded an old cassette into a second machine beside it, her hands steady despite the years, and I realized she'd transferred the tapes at some point, kept them alive the way you keep anything alive, by refusing to let it go quiet. This is September of '94, she said. Your daddy sat right where you're sitting, told me stories for 2 hours. Most of it's about the light, the ships, the war years before you were born. But there's a piece near the end I never quite understood until just now. She pressed play. Static first, a hiss of old tape. And then my father's voice came out of that little speaker, and I had to put both hands flat on the table because the sound of it went through me like cold water. He sounded younger than I remembered him being. He sounded like a man who still had time. The county's never been honest with me about that point, his voice said. I don't say that with any bitterness. Men do what men do with paperwork. But after the storm in '89, I went down to the courthouse to check on my deed. And the fellow behind the counter told me the book it was recorded in went under 3 feet of water and mud, and half of what was in it was gone for good. He told me, not unkind, that the county was treating anything unrecorded from before that storm as surplus, unless somebody came forward and made enough noise about it. I had a notary friend of mine swear an affidavit right then, but I never went back to make the noise. Cynthia's finger hovered near the stop button, but she let it run. Why not? Her own younger voice asked, off tape, barely audible. Because I had 2 little girls, my father's voice said, and no money for a lawyer, and I decided the tower and the light mattered more to fight for than a strip of marsh the county already half believed was theirs. I told myself I'd get to it. I never got to it. I expect one day somebody's going to find that affidavit and wonder why an old fool sat on a fortune he didn't know he had. Cynthia stopped the tape there. The room was quiet except for the creek moving outside the window, and my own breath, which had gone unsteady somewhere in the middle of that recording. He knew, I said. He knew exactly what the county was doing with those parcels. It wasn't a secret, not really, Cynthia said. Not to the people who lived through it. Hugo flooded that records room bad. Worse than anybody in Charleston ever wanted printed in the newspaper. The county didn't have the staff or the budget to go chasing down every landowner whose deed got lost in the mud. So, they let time do the work for them. Anything nobody defended loud enough, after enough years, they folded it into county surplus and called it clean title. It wasn't legal, not really, not if you look at it hard. But nobody ever did look at it hard, until now, I suppose. There's a 90-day clock on something like that, Walter said. Isn't there? Once the county actually moves to claim it. Cynthia looked at him, and something passed between the two of them, some understanding of coastal land and coastal government that I didn't have the years to share yet. There can be, she said, if the county's filed a formal notice or started the process. I don't know if they have on this one. That's not something I can tell you sitting in this room. That's a question for a title attorney, somebody who can pull the county's own filings and tell you exactly where the clock stands, if there's a clock running at all. Do you know somebody? I said. Somebody who wouldn't be scared off by a fight like this. Cynthia was already nodding before I finished asking. Donna Jackson, Charleston. She's done title work on old coastal parcels for 20 years. The kind of land nobody else wants to touch because the paper trail's a mess. She helped the society itself untangle a boundary dispute on a cemetery plot back in 2019. She's sharp, and she's not afraid of a courthouse that doesn't want to be questioned. She was already writing the name and a phone number on a scrap of paper from the desk. Tell her I sent you. Tell her to pull the county's surplus filings on the Cape Romaine parcel first thing, before anything else. My phone buzzed in my pocket right then, and I almost let it go. But old habit made me glance at the screen, and it was Anthony's name lighting up the display. You can let that ring, Walter said, watching my face. I know, I said, but I answered it anyway, because some part of me still wanted to know what he'd say, before he knew what I knew. Teresa, Anthony's voice came through, warm the way a salesman's voice is warm, easy, and quick. Listen, I've been thinking about that offer. $40,000 for a condemned tower nobody can build on. That's not nothing, especially at your age, with everything you're dealing with right now. I really think you ought to sign that quit claim before this Brady fellow changes his mind. Erica and I could come out this weekend, help you get it all squared away, make sure you're not overwhelmed by the paperwork. I looked at Cynthia's handwriting on that scrap of paper. Donna Jackson, Charleston. I looked at the deed still lying open on the table between us, and at Walter, who had gone very still, watching me the way a man watches somebody handling something sharp. I appreciate you thinking of me, Anthony, I said, and I kept my voice even, kept it pleasant. The way I used to keep my voice pleasant at every family dinner, where I'd learned to say less than I meant. But I'm not signing anything this weekend. I've got some things I need to look into first. There was a pause on the line, short, but I heard it. Things like what, he said, and the warmth had gone thin around the edges. Just things, I said. I'll call you when I know more. I ended the call before he could answer, and set the phone face down on the table, and looked up to find both Cynthia and Walter watching me with the same expression. Something that might have been pride if it hadn't been so quiet. He's in an awful hurry, Cynthia said, for a man who thinks that land is worthless. He's always in a hurry, I said. It's usually the first sign something's worth slowing down for. Cynthia folded the scrap of paper with Donna Jackson's number and pressed it into my hand, closed my fingers around it the way you'd close a child's hand around a shell worth keeping. Call her today, she said. Don't wait on that clock to tell you it's already run out. I looked down at the number in my palm and then at the deed, the affidavit, the letter still sitting open on the table where my father's handwriting waited for whatever came next, and I thought about him sitting in this very room 30 years ago, telling a tape machine the truth about what he'd never gotten around to finishing. I won't wait, I said. I've waited long enough on things I had no business waiting on. I hung up my phone and looked at Walter, and he looked back at me, and neither one of us moved for a second, like we both knew that once we walked out of that reading room, there wasn't any walking backward into the life I'd had 2 weeks ago. You want to call her from here, Walter said, or you want to get home first? Here, I said, before I lose my nerve. Cynthia pushed the phone on the front desk toward me, an old corded thing that still had a rotary dial sitting next to it for looks, though the phone itself was a regular push button. I dialed the number off the scrap of paper with my hand not quite steady, and a woman answered on the second ring, brisk, businesslike, the kind of voice that had said 100 names into that receiver before mine. Jackson Title and Land Law. My name is Teresa Watson, I said. Cynthia Blair at the McClellanville Historical Society gave me your number. I have some documents I need somebody to look at. Old ones. A deed from 1971, and some other papers that go with it. There was a pause on the line, short, and then the voice came back different, sharper, like a person leaning forward in her chair. What kind of documents exactly? A deed to a point of land out on Jeremy Creek Road, I said, under a signal tower. There's an affidavit from 1989, notarized, and I have reason to believe the county may have treated the property as forfeited surplus without anybody ever telling the family that held title to it. The pause this time was longer. When she spoke again, her voice had lost every trace of the routine front desk tone it started with. "Mrs. Watson, can you be in Charleston tomorrow morning? Bring everything. Don't let anybody photograph it. Don't let anybody else touch it before I do. And for heaven's sake, don't sign anything in the meantime." "I wasn't planning to," I said. "Good," she said. 9 o'clock. I'm on Broad Street, 3rd floor. The sign says Jackson Title and Land Law right on the glass. I'll clear the morning. I hung up the phone and looked at Cynthia, and she had her arms crossed over her cardigan, watching me with an expression I hadn't seen, turned on me since I was a much younger woman, standing in this same building asking about a school project. "She cleared her morning for you, sight unseen," Cynthia said. "That tells you something." "It tells me she believed me," I said. "It tells me she's already guessing what you've got," Walter said, "and she doesn't want to lose the chance to be the one who proves it." We drove out to Charleston the next morning before the sun had finished climbing over the marsh, Walter behind the wheel again, because he said he wasn't about to let me white-knuckle 2 hours of highway with a tin box on my lap, and I didn't argue with him. The tin box rode on the seat between us, wrapped in the same dish towel, and every time we hit a pothole, I put my hand flat on the lid without thinking about it, the way you'd steady a sleeping baby. Donna Jackson's office sat above a coffee shop on Broad Street, narrow stairs, a landing that smelled like old paper and printer toner, and a door with frosted glass and gold lettering that had been touched up more than once over the years. She met us at the door herself, no receptionist between her and the hallway. A tall woman with steel-gray hair pulled back tight and reading glasses pushed up on her head, 55, in a blazer that looked like it had seen a courtroom more than once that month. "Mrs. Watson," she said, and shook my hand with a grip that didn't apologize for its strength. "And you'd be Mr. Hines. Cynthia told me a little on the phone this morning. Come in, sit down, and let's see what you've carried all this way." Her office was lined with map cases, flat wooden drawers stacked floor to ceiling, county plats and survey maps rolled and filed by decade. She cleared a long table by simply sliding a stack of folders to one side, and I set the tin box down and unwrapped it, and laid the deed, the affidavit, and the letter out in a row the way I'd learned to do it now, careful, each document given its own space to breathe. Donna didn't touch anything at first. She pulled her glasses down off her head and leaned over the table, hands clasped behind her back like a woman inspecting a crime scene, reading without moving a single page. 1971, she said, mostly to herself. Federal surplus auction language that's consistent with how the Coast Guard divested some of these old lookout parcels back then. She moved to the affidavit, notarized 89, county seal, county notary number. She looked up at me. "Do you know why your father had this re-notarized instead of simply refiling the original deed?" "He explained it on a tape," I said. "Cynthia has it. After Hurricane Hugo flooded the courthouse records room, somebody told him the county was treating unrecorded parcels as surplus unless a family made noise about it. He didn't have money for a fight, not with 2 daughters to raise, so he protected what he had the only way he knew how, and told himself he'd finish the job later." Donna's mouth went tight for a second, not unkind, more like a woman recognizing a story she'd heard in different clothes a dozen times before. "That's not an unusual thing to have happened along this coast after that storm," she said. "It's not something the county likes printed in a newspaper, but it happened. Records rooms flooded, staff overwhelmed, and quiet policies that let unclaimed land drift into county hands over time instead of anybody having to fight for it in open court." She finally sat down across from me, pulled a legal pad toward her, and started writing. "I'm going to need to pull the county surplus filings on this parcel, cross it against surviving microfilm from the courthouse, and I want to hear that tape myself, all the way through, not secondhand. Can Cynthia make me a copy?" "She already said she would," Walter said. "Good." Donna looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Mrs. Watson, I want to be honest with you about what this could mean, and I don't want you walking out of here thinking I've promised you anything today. A deed and an affidavit are a strong start. They are not, by themselves, a court judgment. I'll need to file for a quiet title action, which means putting the county and any other claimant on formal notice that you're asserting ownership, and letting a judge settle it once and for all. That takes time and it takes money, though I don't work on an hourly rate for something like this. I work on contingency, a percentage if we win, nothing if we don't. How long, I said. How much time do I have before whatever the county's been doing catches up and finishes on its own? Donna's pen stopped moving. That's the right question, she said. And I can't answer it exactly until I pull the county's own file. But if they've already opened a forfeiture process on this parcel, formally, on paper, there's often a window, sometimes as short as 90 days, before that process closes and the county's claim hardens into something very difficult to undo. I'd rather know that answer this week than next month. She stood, gathered the documents with the same careful hands I'd been using myself for 2 days now, and slid them into a clean folder instead of the tin box. "Give me 5 days," she said. "I'll pull everything. I'll listen to the tape. And I'll tell you exactly what you're sitting on, dollar figure and all, before you make a single decision about anybody's offer." 5 days felt like a long time to sit on my hands. But I drove home with Walter that afternoon and did the only thing I knew how to do while I waited, which was work. I cleared the rest of my father's workshop, oiled the hinges on the tower door that had been sticking since before Gerald died, patched a soft spot in the gallery, decking with lumber Walter hauled over from his own place without being asked. Anthony called twice more that week, and I let both calls go to voicemail and didn't listen to either one until I was ready. On the 5th day, Donna called instead of waiting for me to call her, and her voice on the phone had a different weight to it than it had in her office, careful in a way that made my stomach drop before she said a single number. "Mrs. Watson," she said, "I need you back in Charleston. Tomorrow, if you can manage it. And I'd like Cynthia there too, if she's willing to make the drive, because I want the oral history in the room when I say what I'm about to say." "Just tell me now," I said. "Please." There was a pause, and I could hear her take a breath on the other end of the line, the kind of breath a person takes before they say something they know is going to change the room they're standing in. "I pulled the microfilm," Donna said. "Your father's original deed matches it, boundary for boundary. The county did open an unrecorded surplus review on that parcel, and yes, there's a window closing on it, 90 days from the date they mailed a notice to the last known address on file, which was your father's, who's been dead 15 years, so nobody living ever saw that notice. You have 61 days left before that window shuts for good." "And the land," I said, my voice barely holding together. "What is it actually worth?" Donna didn't answer right away. I heard papers shifting on her end, and when she spoke again, she said it plain, the way you'd rate a number off a scale rather than dress it up for anybody's comfort. 4 acres of high ground with existing shoreline access and development rights that nobody's touched or built out in 50 years, in a market where Palmetto Tideline's already paying premium dollar for anything comparable up the coast. My appraiser's initial number, and I stress initial, came back at $4,600,000. I sat down on the porch step, right where I was standing, because my legs simply stopped agreeing to hold me up. "Mrs. Watson," Donna said, gentler now. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I said. "I just need a minute." "Take your minute," she said, "but not too many of them. 61 days isn't as long as it sounds, and once I file, other people are going to hear about this a great deal faster than you'd like." I sat there on that porch step with the phone still warm against my ear, and Donna waited on the other end, not pushing me, just letting the number sit in the air the way you let a hot pan sit before you touch it. "I heard you," I finally said. 4,600,000. 61 days. "That's right," Donna said. "And Mrs. Watson, I want you to hear this part too. That number is an initial appraisal. It could move once we've got a survey confirming the shoreline boundary and the development easement attached to it. It could move up or down," I said. "It could," she said, honest as ever, "but I don't think so. Not on land like that, not in this market. I need you and Cynthia both in my office tomorrow morning. I want to file the quiet title action by the end of the week, and I want that oral history tape logged as part of the record before anybody has a chance to say it doesn't exist." "I'll be there," I said. "Bring Walter too," she said. "I may need a witness who can speak to the property itself, not just the paper." I hung up and looked at Walter, who hadn't moved from where he stood at the bottom of the steps, hands in his pockets, watching my face the whole time, like he'd been reading the number off it before I ever said it out loud. "Well," he said, $4,600,000, I said. And saying it out loud the second time didn't make it feel any more real than the first. For 4 acres my own children didn't think were worth the gas money to drive out and look at. Walter let out a breath, long and slow, and sat down next to me on the step, the wood creaking under both of us. "Your daddy knew," he said. "He always knew. He just didn't have the money or the nerve to fight the county on it back then. Not with 2 little girls and a wife to feed on a signalman's pension. So he did the only thing he could do. He locked it up and he waited for somebody he trusted to be ready. And I wasn't ready for 30 years, I said. You're ready now, he said. That's the part that matters." We drove into Charleston the next morning, Cynthia riding along this time in the back seat of Walter's truck with a manila envelope in her lap, holding a fresh copy of the tape, and none of us talked much on the highway, the marsh grass sliding by gold and green in the early light. Donna met us at the door again, same steel gray hair, same reading glasses pushed up, but there was an energy in her office that hadn't been there 5 days before, folders stacked and tabbed, a fresh legal pad already half filled with her own handwriting before we'd even sat down. "I want to move fast," she said, setting a thin stack of papers in front of me. "This is an engagement letter. I worked this case on contingency, 30% if we win a judgment or a settlement, nothing if we don't. You don't owe me a dime out of pocket today." I read it over twice, slow, the way I'd learned to read everything over the last 2 weeks, and Walter read it over my shoulder without pretending he wasn't. 30% of $4,600,000 is a lot of money, I said. "It is," Donna said, no apology in her voice. "So is losing the whole $4,600,000 to a county forfeiture claim because nobody filed in time. I'd rather take 30% of something than 100% of nothing, and so should you." I signed it. My hand shook a little on the last letter of my name, but I signed it. Cynthia set the tape on Donna's desk like she was setting down something alive, and Donna slid it into a small recorder and let it run just long enough to hear my father's voice fill that office, steady and low, talking about a storm in a records room and a decision he made because he didn't see any other way through it. Nobody said anything while it played. Cynthia had her hands folded in her lap, and Walter looked down at the floor, and I looked at the window behind Donna's desk, at the church steeples out over the rooftops of Charleston, and thought about my father sitting in a folding chair 30 years ago telling the truth to a machine because he didn't trust it to anybody living yet. Donna clicked it off after a minute. "That's exactly what I needed," she said. "I'm filing the quiet title petition this afternoon. Once it's filed, the county has to respond, and their own forfeiture clock stops moving against you while the court sorts out who actually holds title. That protects you immediately, even before we get a final judgment." "How long before we know for certain?" I asked. "Months, most likely," Donna said. "These things move slow, especially against a government body that doesn't love being told it moved too fast on somebody's land 35 years ago. But the filing itself buys you room to breathe. Nobody can finish taking that point out from under you while this is pending." We drove home that afternoon with the sun dropping low and orange over the water. And for the first time since I'd stood in Vincent's living room 2 weeks earlier, looking at papers with my own signature already on them, I let myself feel something close to steady. Walter dropped Cynthia at her house first, and by the time we turned onto Jeremy Creek Road, the light had gone soft and gray, the kind of evening that made the tower look almost gentle against the sky instead of rusted and forgotten, the way my children had always seen it. There was a car parked in the gravel turnout by my gate, not Anthony's sedan, a different one, dark green, clean, the kind of car that belonged to somebody who didn't do his own oil changes, and standing beside it, arms crossed, waiting the way a man waits when he's decided to wait as long as it takes, was Marcus Brady. Walter slowed the truck and looked at me. "You want me to keep driving?" he said. "No," I said. "I want to hear what he's got to say." Walter pulled in behind the green car and cut the engine, and we both got out, and Marcus straightened up off the fender he'd been leaning against. That same easy smile from before sliding onto his face, though it looked a little more careful this time, like a man checking his footing before he stepped onto it. "Mrs. Watson," he said. "I hope you don't mind me waiting." I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. "I've been in Charleston," I said. "Business?" "I figured it might be something like that," he said. And there was something underneath his voice now, a thread of nerves he hadn't had the first time he stood in my yard offering $40,000 like it was doing me a favor. He reached into the car through the open window and came back out with a manila folder, thicker than the paperwork he'd shown me before. Crisp corners, a company letterhead I could see even from 10 feet away. Palmetto Tideline Holdings printed across the top in dark green letters. Company wanted me to put something formal in your hands, he said, and held the folder out to me. A real offer this time. Written, signed, ready for your signature whenever you're ready to sign it. I didn't take it right away. I looked at him, standing there in the gravel with the tower rising up gray and quiet behind him, and I thought about Anthony's voice on the phone telling me to sign quick before Marcus changed his mind. And I thought about Donna's voice telling me the county's own clock was ticking, and I thought about how fast everybody suddenly seemed to want a piece of paper in my hand before I'd had time to think. How much? I said. Marcus's jaw worked for a second before he answered. $65,000, he said. That's a significant increase from our first conversation, Mrs. Watson. Company doesn't usually move a number that much in 2 weeks, unless somebody upstairs decided the location's got more strategic value than we first estimated. Strategic value, I said, turning the words over. That's an interesting way to put it for a condemned tower nobody can build on. Something flickered behind his eyes, quick, there and gone. And I understood then, standing in my own gravel drive with the evening coming down, soft and gray around us, that Marcus Brady didn't know what I knew. Not the real number, not the deed sealed 35 years and a table leg, not the affidavit, not any of it. He'd only smelled something worth chasing. The way a man smells rain coming before the first drop falls, and his company had sent him back out here with more money because somebody's gut told them to move before whatever it was got away from them. Walter stood a step behind me, quiet, letting me handle it, but I felt him there all the same, solid as the porch post at my back. I'll look it over, I said, and took the folder from Marcus's hand, though I didn't open it, just held it against my side like it weighed more than paper should. 30 days, Marcus said. That's the window on this offer. After that, I can't promise the number holds. 61 days is the only window I'm minding right now, I said before I could stop myself, and watched his face change, just slightly. A small furrow of confusion crossing it, like he was trying to work out what I meant and couldn't quite land on it. I'm not sure I follow, he said. You don't need to, I said, and turned toward the tower door, the folder still in my hand, my key already out and ready in the other. Walter fell into step beside me without a word, and behind us I heard Marcus's car door open, then close, then the engine turn over and gravel crunch under his tires as he pulled back out onto Jeremy Creek Road, taillights fading red into the dusk. I stood on my own porch a moment before going inside, looking down at that folder with the green Palmetto Tideline letterhead, catching the last of the light, and I thought about how strange it was to be holding two different truths about the same 4 acres of ground in my 2 hands. The $65,000 Marcus Brady thought was generous, and the $4,600,000 Donna Jackson had said out loud, like a woman reading a scale. He's scared of something, Walter said quietly, standing at the door. Or somebody above him is. Whatever it is, I said, it's not going to be settled tonight. I unlocked the door and went inside, and set the folder on my father's map table, right next to where the tin box had sat 2 weeks earlier, and looked at it there for a long moment before I finally reached over and turned on the lamp. I opened the folder under the lamplight, and Walter leaned over my shoulder to read it with me. $65,000, printed clean on Palmetto Tideline letterhead, a blank line waiting for my name at the bottom, a date 30 days out, circled in the corner like somebody wanted to make sure I couldn't miss it. I closed the folder without signing anything and set it on the shelf above the map table, out of the lamplight, where it could sit and wait same as I was waiting. The phone rang before I'd even sat down. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway, because these days every call felt like it might be Donna or the county or somebody with news that mattered. Teresa. Just my name, flat, no hello in front of it. It took me a second to place the voice because I hadn't heard it in almost a year, not since Gerald's funeral when she'd stood at the back of the church and left before the reception. Nancy, I said, I heard you filed something at the courthouse about Daddy's land. I looked at Walter and he raised his eyebrows, and I understood in that moment that whatever quiet I'd bought myself for 5 days was already over. That word moved through McClellanville faster than any lawyer's letter ever could. Who told you that? I said. Doesn't matter who told me, Nancy said. What matters is you're sitting on something worth a fortune, and you didn't call your own sister. It's not settled, Nancy. There's a court process. It could take months. A court process for what, exactly? Last I heard, that tower wasn't worth the trouble of tearing it down. Now suddenly you've got lawyers. Her voice climbed, sharp at the edges, the way it used to climb when we were girls, and she thought I'd gotten something she hadn't. I got the house and the savings account 15 years ago, Teresa, and everybody agreed that was fair because the tower was junk. Nobody agreed to this. Nobody knew about this, I said, including me, until 3 weeks ago. Well, I know now, she said, and I'm not going to sit quiet while you cash in on land that came out of Daddy's estate, same as everything else did. That's not just yours. That's ours. I stood up from the porch step, my knee complaining the way it always did when I moved too fast, and I walked to the rail and looked out at the marsh going dark, the tide pulling back off the mud flats, birds settling into the grass for the night. Daddy left me the tower in his will, Nancy. Free and clear, you got the house. That was his decision, not mine. And you didn't argue with it for 15 years. Because I thought it was worthless, she snapped. You think I'd have let you walk off with 4 acres of waterfront if I'd known what it was sitting on? I want a lawyer of my own. I want the estate reopened, and I want my share. And if you fight me on it, I'll make sure everybody in this county knows exactly what kind of sister you turned out to be. The line went dead before I could answer her. I stood there holding the phone against my ear a second longer, listening to nothing, and then I lowered it and looked out at the water some more, because there wasn't anything gentle waiting inside me to say back to that, and I've learned it's better to hold your tongue than to hand somebody a reason to say you lost your temper. She hung up on you, Walter said. She did. Sounds like her, he said, not unkindly, just stating a fact he'd apparently known a long time. Harold used to say Nancy wanted the credit without the work, every single time. He never told me that. He wouldn't. Wasn't his way to talk bad on his own girls to strangers. But he said it to me once or twice, out on the water, when there wasn't anybody else to hear it. Walter shifted his weight against the porch post. You going to fight her for the estate too? I don't want to fight anybody for anything, I said. I just want what's mine to stay mine, and I want Donna to finish what she started. I thought that would be the last of it for the night, but the phone rang again 20 minutes later, and this time it was Vincent. Mom. His voice had a rehearsed sound to it, careful, like he'd practiced the first line in the truck on his way to wherever he was calling from. Aunt Nancy called Erica. She's saying you're about to come into millions off Grandpa's old tower. It's not settled, I said again, the same words I'd given his aunt, because they were the true words, and I didn't have any others. There's a legal process. Nothing's final. Millions, Mom, and you didn't think to call your own kids? I called Donna Jackson, I said. She's a title attorney. She's the one handling it. It's her job to get the facts straight before anybody starts spending money that isn't spent yet. There was a pause on his end, and I heard Anthony's voice in the background, low, feeding him something. And then Vincent came back on with a different tone entirely, flatter, more careful, like a man reading off a card somebody handed him. Anthony thinks we should talk about this as a family, all of us. He says at your age, dealing with something this big, right after losing Dad, it's a lot to carry alone. He thinks maybe you need somebody looking out for your interests. Legally, I mean. I have somebody looking out for my interests, I said. Her name is Donna Jackson, and she's very good at her job. That's not really what he meant, Vincent said, and I could hear him choosing his words now, picking around something he didn't want to say straight out. He meant somebody family, somebody who can help make sure decisions get made the right way, given everything. The stress of it, Dad passing, and now, all this. Vincent, I said, keeping my voice even, though my hand had gone tight around the porch rail. Say what you're actually trying to say. Another pause, longer this time, and then Anthony's voice came through directly, no longer background noise, close to the phone like he'd taken it right out of Vincent's hand. Teresa, it's Anthony. Look, nobody's trying to upset you, but you have to understand how this looks from the outside. A woman your age, recently widowed, alone out at that tower, and suddenly there's millions of dollars in play, and a landman showing up unannounced, and a lawyer you found on your own, without any of us in the room. Erica's worried. I'm worried. We just think, given the size of this, it makes sense to have some oversight. For your protection. Oversight, I repeated, and the word sat strange in my mouth, like a stone I hadn't expected to bite down on. There's a legal process for it, Anthony said, smooth now. Back on ground, he clearly felt comfortable standing on. It's not an accusation, It's a safeguard. The court looks at the whole situation and makes sure the person managing an estate of that size is capable of handling it without being taken advantage of. I looked out at the tower rising up dark against the last gray light. At the gallery railing, Walter and I had spent an afternoon bracing at the workshop window where the map table sat with $65,000 of paper on the shelf above it and $4,600,000 of truth locked away in a courthouse file cabinet in Charleston. You want to tell a judge I'm not capable, I said slowly, of managing my own father's land? Nobody's saying incapable, Anthony said too quickly. We're saying careful. There's a difference. There isn't, I said, not the way you mean it, and I hung up the phone before he could find another smooth word to lay over the ugly one underneath it. Walter didn't ask what was said. He must have read enough of it off my face, standing there in the dark with the phone still warm in my hand and the tide going out below the point, because he just came and stood beside me at the rail, quiet, the two of us looking at the water, the way you look at something steady when everything else has started moving too fast to follow. They're going to file something, I said finally, aren't they? Sounds that way, Walter said. On what grounds? I run this house. I coordinated a title search. I hired a lawyer. I found a witness. I've done every bit of this myself in 3 weeks flat. That's exactly what you tell the judge, Walter said. If it comes to that, you don't hide from it. You lay it all out, same as you laid it out for Donna, and you let the paper speak for you. He looked over at me, steady, the way he always looked at things, like a man who'd spent 40 years reading weather off the horizon and had learned not to flinch at what he saw coming. You built this whole thing standing up, Teresa. Don't go soft on them now, just because they finally noticed. I nodded, though my throat had gone tight, and I went back inside and called Donna first thing the next morning, before I'd even had coffee, and told her everything. Nancy's call, Vincent's call, Anthony's word for it, oversight, and the careful rehearsed shape the whole conversation had taken, like it had been drafted somewhere else before it ever reached my ear. Donna was quiet for a moment on the other end. Then she said, "That's a competency petition they're describing, Mrs. Watson. If they file it, it becomes a matter of public record, and the county will set a hearing date." "How bad is that?" I asked. "It's not bad," Donna said, "if the record backs you up. And Mrs. Watson, your record backs you up better than almost anyone I've ever represented. You've done everything right, start to finish, on your own initiative, with witnesses to every step of it." She paused. "But I won't lie to you. It'll be a public hearing. Everybody who wants to hear it will get to hear it, your children included, and it won't be gentle." "I didn't come this far to be gentle," I said, and for the first time since Nancy's voice had come crackling flat and furious down the phone line the night before, I felt something in my chest settle instead of shake. The papers came 4 days later. I was out at the workshop window, rubbing linseed oil into the map table the way Walter had shown me, when I saw the car pull up. Not Marcus Brady's car. A county car, white, with a seal on the door, and a young man in a golf shirt got out holding a manila envelope like it might bite him. "Teresa Watson," he said. "That's me. I'm serving you on behalf of the Charleston County Probate Court." He held the envelope out, and I took it, because there wasn't any other way to take it. "Have a good day, ma'am," he said, already walking back to his car, like he wanted to be gone before I opened it. I didn't open it standing in the gravel. I carried it inside first, and set it on the map table, and Walter came in from the workshop, with sawdust still on his forearms, and stood next to me while I broke the seal. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. Vincent Watson, petitioner, in the matter of Teresa Watson, an alleged incapacitated and disabled person. I read that line twice. Alleged incapacitated and disabled person. My own name sitting right up against those words like they belong together. "They use those words," I said. "Incapacitated, disabled. That's the legal language," Walter said, reading over my shoulder, his voice careful. "Doesn't mean anything about what's true, means what a lawyer typed on a form. Doesn't feel like a form." I set it down on the table, flat, and smoothed my hand over the page like that would change what was written on it. It feels like somebody looked me in the eye and called me broken. "Nobody in this room thinks you're broken." I looked up at him. "I know that. I'm allowed a minute anyway." "You're allowed the whole day," he said, "if you need it." I didn't take the whole day. I took maybe 10 minutes standing there with my hand on the table and my father's tools hanging on the wall behind me, and then I picked up the phone and called Donna Jackson and read her the case number off the top of the page. They filed, Donna said, and I heard her breathe out, slow, like she'd been waiting for it, and it still cost her something to hear it confirmed. All right, that's not a surprise, Mrs. Watson, and it's not a disaster either. I want you to hear both of those things at once. Hearing's already scheduled, I said, reading further down the page. Says here the 4th of August. 3 weeks, Donna said. That's fast, but it's not unusual for these. The court doesn't like to leave a competency question hanging. A pause, papers shuffling on her end. I want you to bring me everything. Every receipt, every phone log, every email you've sent me, the survey report, the title search invoice, all of it. I'm going to build a folder an inch thick and I'm going to put it in front of a judge and let it speak. What do I do between now and then? You keep living exactly the way you've been living, Donna said. You keep making your own decisions, on your own timeline, with your own good judgment, because that's the best evidence there is, and you let me handle the parts that need handling. I thanked her and hung up, and then I sat down at the map table because my knees had gone a little unsteady under me, not from fear exactly, more from the strange weight of having a date now. August the 4th. A day with my name attached to a courtroom. Walter pulled a chair over and sat across from me, and for a while neither of us said anything, just sat there in the workshop with the papers between us and the tide sound coming faint through the window. I want Cynthia there, I said finally, if she's willing. She'll be willing, Walter said. That woman's been carrying your daddy's voice on a cassette tape for 30 years. She's not going to sit home while somebody tries to say his daughter can't be trusted with what he left her. I called Cynthia that evening. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her about the petition, about the word incapacitated printed next to my name, she went quiet for a second, and then her voice came back with an edge in it I hadn't heard from her before. They want to stand up in a courtroom, she said, and tell a judge that a woman who tracked down a land attorney, ordered a structural survey, and found me inside of 3 weeks can't manage her own affairs. That's about the size of it. I'll be there, Cynthia said. I'll bring the recording and the transcript both, and I'll sit in that courtroom as long as they need me to. Another pause. Your father used to say something to me, back when I was recording him. He said most folks think the tower's the interesting part, on account of the light and the height of it. He said the interesting part was always underneath, the foundation nobody sees. She let that sit a moment. I think that's what this hearing is going to be about, Teresa. Whether anybody in that room can see what's underneath you. I didn't have an answer for that right away, so I just thanked her again and told her I'd call with the exact time once Donna confirmed it, and hung up feeling something steadier in my chest than I'd felt since the process server's car had pulled into the gravel. Vincent called 2 nights before the hearing. I almost didn't answer, and then I thought better of it, because whatever he had to say, I'd rather hear it than wonder about it. Mom. His voice sounded thinner than it had on the phone before, less rehearsed. I wanted to call before Thursday. Just to say it's not personal. You filed a paper calling me incapacitated, Vincent. It's about as personal as it gets. Anthony said it was the responsible thing to do, given the money involved, given everything with Dad. A breath on his end, long, like he was working up to something. I don't know anymore, Mom. I keep going back and forth on it. Then don't go to court Thursday, I said. Withdraw it. I can't. Anthony already, he stopped himself. It's already filed. It's already moving. Everything that's moving, I said, can still be stopped if the person moving it wants to stop it badly enough. You're 42 years old, Vincent. You don't need Anthony's permission to change your mind. He didn't answer that. I heard him breathing on the other end, and somewhere behind him a television murmured low, and after a while he just said, I'll see you Thursday, and hung up. And I stood there in the kitchen holding the phone. Not angry exactly, just tired in a way that went down deep into my bones. Walter found me still standing there 10 minutes later. He's wavering, I told him. Wavering's not the same as backing out. No, I said, but it's not nothing either. Thursday morning, I put on the navy blue dress I'd worn to Gerald's funeral because it was the only good dress I owned that still fit right. And I stood in front of the small mirror in the tower's upstairs room and looked at myself for a long moment. 66 years old, widowed 6 months. A folder of receipts and survey reports sitting on the map table downstairs, thick enough to need both hands to carry. Walter was waiting by his truck when I came down, dressed in a collared shirt I'd never seen him wear before, his gray hair combed flat. You ready? He said. No, I said, but I'm going anyway. That's usually how it works, he said, and opened the truck door for me, and I climbed in and looked back once at the tower, standing gray against the morning sky before we pulled out onto Jeremy Creek Road, toward Charleston, toward whatever was waiting for me in that courtroom. The courthouse sat downtown, a squat brick building with tall windows and a flag hanging still in the July heat, and Walter found parking 2 blocks over because the lot out front was already full by 9 in the morning. I carried the folder myself. Donna had told me to, said a person who shows up holding her own evidence looks like a person managing her own affairs, and I understood the sense in that the second I felt the weight of it in my arms, an 1.5 inches thick, tabbed with little colored stickers where Donna had marked the pages she wanted the judge to see first. Erica was waiting on the courthouse steps. I hadn't expected that, not standing outside in the sun with her arms crossed over a gray blazer, but there she was. And when she saw me, she didn't wave, just watched me come up the steps with an expression I couldn't read, somewhere between apology and resolve. "Mom," she said, "Erica." I didn't want it to come to this. Her voice was quiet, pitched low enough that it wouldn't carry to the people passing on either side of us. I told Anthony that, more than once. "But you're here," I said, standing on his side of it. "I'm his wife." She said it like that settled something, like it was an answer instead of just a fact. "He says it's for your own protection. Your grandfather used to say a thing," I told her, and I don't know why it came out of me right there on the steps, except that it felt true, and I wanted her to hear it before we walked through those doors. He said the tower light never protected the ships. It just showed them where the rocks were. Whether they turned away was up to them. I shifted the folder against my hip. "I'm not asking you to turn away, Erica. I'm just telling you the rocks are right there, plain as day, and you're the only one who gets to decide if you see them." She didn't answer that. She looked down at her shoes, and then Anthony came up behind her, a hand at the small of her back, steering her gently toward the door, and the moment closed before it could go any further. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd pictured it, wood-paneled, rows of benches like a church, and Vincent was already seated up near the front on the left side. A legal pad in front of him, he kept squaring and re-squaring like it needed to be perfectly straight before anything could start. He looked up when I came in. Our eyes caught for a second, and something crossed his face, fast, gone before I could name it. And then he looked back down at his pad. Walter walked me to a bench on the right and sat beside me, close, his shoulder nearly touching mine. Cynthia arrived a few minutes later, a canvas bag over her shoulder with the edge of a cassette player poking out of it, and she slid in on my other side without a word, just reached over and squeezed my hand once, hard, before letting go. Donna came in last, moving fast, a leather case in one hand and a second folder tucked under her arm, and she stopped at our bench just long enough to lean down and say, "Lo, whatever they argue first, let them argue it. Don't react. I'll get my turn." "I trust you," I said, and meant it, though my heart was going harder than I wanted it to. A side door opened and the bailiff called the room to order, and Judge Alma Whitcomb came in, a woman, maybe 60, silver hair cut close, reading glasses already perched on her nose as she settled behind the bench and pulled a file toward her. "In the matter of Teresa Watson," she said, without looking up yet, "petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. Mr. Watson, you're the petitioner." Vincent stood, buttoning his jacket, and I watched my son's hands shake just slightly as he did it. "Yes, Your Honor, and you're represented by," the judge glanced at her papers, "Mr. Serrano, who I understand is not an attorney of record but has been assisting." "I'm a licensed real estate agent, Your Honor," Anthony said, rising beside Vincent. "I've been advising the family informally. We retained counsel as well, Mr. Foster, who's here today." A thin man in a gray suit stood at the table beside Vincent and gave a short nod. I hadn't even noticed him come in. "Very well," the judge said. "Let's hear the petition." Mr. Foster cleared his throat and began. And it was strange, sitting there listening to a stranger describe my life back to me in flattened, careful language, like I was a case file instead of a person. He talked about my age. He talked about Gerald's death in January, 6 months prior, and the strain of sudden widowhood. He talked about a property that had, in his words, rapidly escalated in claimed value under circumstances the family finds concerning, and about an unsolicited land offer, and about my retaining independent counsel without consulting my children, and about the general vulnerability of an elderly woman living alone at a remote property. The family isn't alleging malice on anyone's part, he said, simply an abundance of caution, given the scale of what's potentially at stake. We're asking the court to appoint a co-conservator, someone from the family, to oversee decisions related to this property until matters are fully resolved. Judge Whitcomb took notes without much expression on her face, and when Foster sat down, she looked over the rim of her glasses toward our side of the room. Mrs. Watson has counsel present, I understand. Donna stood. Donna Jackson, Your Honor, representing Mrs. Watson. Go ahead, Miss Jackson. Donna set her leather case on the table, opened it, and drew out the first folder, the one with the colored tabs, and for a second she just rested her hand flat on top of it, like she was steadying herself, or maybe steadying the room. Your Honor, I'd like to start by saying what this petition doesn't contain, she said. It doesn't contain a single specific example of a decision my client made poorly, not one. It doesn't allege memory loss, confusion, and inability to manage her finances or any medical basis at all. What it contains is a list of things Mrs. Watson did correctly, reframed as evidence of vulnerability. She opened the folder. On June the 9th, 3 weeks after her husband's estate was distributed without her meaningful input, Mrs. Watson received an unsolicited purchase offer on a property she'd inherited from her father in 2011. Rather than sign anything on the spot, she made an appointment with a licensed Charleston title attorney. That's me. She brought no family member because at that point, Your Honor, no family member had offered to help her. She brought herself and a folder and a request that I look into her father's original deed. She lifted a page and set it aside, moving to the next. Over the following weeks, acting entirely on her own initiative, Mrs. Watson coordinated a structural survey of the property. She located a witness, Mrs. Cynthia Blair, seated behind me, who recorded her father's oral history in 1994 and who holds the only surviving account of how and why this parcel came to be omitted from county records after Hurricane Hugo. Mrs. Watson arranged for that recording to be transcribed and submitted as part of a title verification process that I am, as of this week, prepared to certify as sound. Your Honor, Foster started, half rising. I'll hear objections when counsel is finished, the judge said, not unkindly, and Foster sat back down. Donna went on, Mrs. Watson did all of this within 3 weeks of losing her husband, while living alone in a house with no working kitchen plumbing, coordinating 4 separate professionals, none of whom she'd ever met before this year, and she did it without a single dollar of assistance from the family, now asking this court to declare her incapable of managing her own affairs. She let that sit a moment, and I felt the whole room go a little still around it. I have receipts, Your Honor. I have phone logs. I have dated correspondence. I have a full paper trail showing a woman exercising exactly the kind of sound, independent judgment this petition claims she lacks. I'd like the court's permission to enter it into the record now, in full. Granted, the judge said, proceed. Donna turned and looked back at me for just a moment before she carried the folder up to the clerk, and there was something in her face. Not quite a smile, but close enough to it that I felt my hands unclench in my lap for the first time since we'd sat down. Walter's shoulder pressed once against mine. Steady and across the aisle, I saw Vincent watching the folder move across the room like he was watching something happen that he hadn't fully accounted for happening. The judge let the silence sit a moment before she spoke again. She looked at Foster, then at Vincent, then, longest of all, at Anthony. Mr. Serrano, she said, you're not a party to this petition on paper. Your name isn't on it, but you've been described to me twice now as the one advising the family informally. I'd like to hear from you directly. What decision, specifically, has Mrs. Watson made that concerns you? Anthony stood slower than he had the first time. Your Honor, it's the scale of the asset. $4.6 million is a lot for one person to manage alone. Is there a dollar figure at which a person stops being capable of managing her own property? The judge asked. Because if there is, I haven't found it in the code, and I've been reading this code for 11 years. A ripple went through the benches, quiet, just breath and shifting weight. Anthony's jaw worked once before he answered. No, Your Honor, I don't have a figure. Then sit down, Mr. Serrano. She looked to Vincent next. Mr. Watson, you're the petitioner of record. Tell me, in your own words, one specific incident where your mother's judgment failed her since your father passed. Vincent stood. His legal pad was still in his hand, and I watched him look down at it like the answer might be written there, and it wasn't. Because there was no answer, and after a moment he set the pad down on the table. I can't, he said. There isn't one. Then why are we here? He didn't answer that either. He just stood there, 42 years old, in a courtroom he'd asked for, with nothing left to say, and I felt something in my chest that wasn't triumph. It was closer to grief, the plain kind, the kind you feel watching someone finally see the thing you'd already seen. The judge took off her reading glasses and set them on the file in front of her. This court has reviewed the petition, the supporting affidavit, and the evidence submitted by respondents' counsel. I find nothing in this record suggesting Teresa Watson lacks capacity to manage her own affairs. I find, in fact, the opposite. This petition is dismissed, with prejudice. She looked over at Foster. And I'll note for the record that filing a competency petition against a parent, absent any medical or behavioral basis, is a serious step, one this court does not take lightly, and one I'd encourage this family to think carefully about before repeating. She gathered her file, and the bailiff called the room to rise. And just like that, it was over, faster than I'd braced for, the whole thing dissolving into shuffling feet and low voices before I'd even fully understood we'd won. Outside on the courthouse steps, Anthony caught up to me before I reached the sidewalk. His face had none of the polish it usually carried. Teresa, we were trying to keep it simple for you. That's all this ever was. I stopped and looked at him. Really looked. And I thought about a kitchen table 2 weeks after Gerald's funeral and a stack of papers already signed. And that same phrase, keep it simple for Mom, laid down like it was a kindness instead of a door closing. It is simple now, I told him. You'll get a schedule from my attorney. You'll pay back what you took. And nothing about my life needs your help to stay simple ever again. I didn't wait to see his face change. I walked to Walter's truck with the folder still under my arm, lighter now, and Cynthia caught my hand once more before she headed to her own car. And Donna told me she'd file the quiet title paperwork by the end of the week, now that the guardianship matter was off the table entirely. It took another 5 weeks after that for the rest of it to settle. The county attorney's office, once Donna's filing crossed their desk with the deed, the affidavit, and Cynthia's transcript all authenticated and stitched together, withdrew its forfeiture claim without a fight. A clerk I never met signed a form, and the 90-day window closed behind me instead of in front of me. Donna called with that news on a Tuesday morning, and I stood in the workshop with the phone against my ear and put my free hand flat on the map table, the way you'd rest a hand on someone's shoulder to tell them it was over. Marcus Brady drove out one more time in September. No folder of forms this time, just himself and a different kind of offer. Palmetto Tideline didn't want to buy the point outright anymore, not after the deed cleared and the appraisal came in solid at $4,600,000. They wanted a conservation easement instead, $180,000 a year for the next decade, paid to keep the shoreline undeveloped and the tower standing, with an additional $220,000 up front to fund a full restoration of the structure itself. Your father's light stays a light, Marcus said, standing where he'd stood the first time. Only now he took his hat off before he said it. Not a subdivision. That's what the company's offering. I know it's not what I came out here with back in the spring. No, I said, it isn't. But I signed it anyway because it kept the point the way Harold had meant it to stay. Undivided, unbuilt. Mine to hand down instead of sell off. The repayment schedule with Vincent and Erica took shape slower and quieter. Donna drew the terms, $310,000, the full amount taken from Gerald's estate, repaid over 6 years, no interest, no lawsuit behind it, just a signed agreement and a promise I intended to hold them to. Nancy called once in August, wanting to know if Harold's whole estate ought to be reopened now that the tower's true worth was public. I told her the house and the savings had been hers fair and square 15 years ago, same as the tower had been mine, and that I wasn't interested in unwinding what our father had already settled. She didn't call again after that. The restoration crew finished the tower in late October. They kept the bones of it, the iron stairs, the round watchroom at the top, but they replaced the rotted floor joists and ran new wiring up through the walls, and they built the whole renovation around the map table instead of moving it. Because I told the foreman on the first day that the table didn't leave that room. Not for scaffolding, not for anything. Walter was there the afternoon the electrician finished wiring the old beacon housing back to a working lamp. Small now, nothing like the Coast Guard light it used to be. Registered instead as a private aid to navigation, the paperwork filed under Harold Clark's name at Donna's suggestion. We stood on the gallery together as the sun went down, and when the lamp caught and started its slow turn over the water, Walter didn't say anything for a long moment. 20 years I stood post with that man, he finally said. Never once heard him say what he was building toward. Guess now we know. Guess we do, I said. Erica came out to the tower on a Saturday in November, alone. No Anthony beside her this time. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the light like she'd never actually seen it before. And maybe she hadn't. Not really, not since she was a girl. I paid the first installment early, she said. Out of my own account, not joint with Anthony. $15,500, ahead of schedule. She looked down at her hands. I know it doesn't undo anything, Mom. No, I said. It doesn't. But it's a start, and I'll take a start over an apology any day. Can I come back sometime? Just to sit, not to ask for anything. I thought about the steps outside the courthouse, the rocks she said she couldn't see. You can come back, I said, slowly. We'll see how it goes. She nodded, like that was more than she'd expected. And maybe it was, and she stayed an hour before she drove off. And I didn't call it forgiveness yet, because it wasn't. Not fully, but it was a door left open instead of shut. And that was its own kind of mercy. That evening I climbed the iron stairs alone, past the workshop, past the map table, sitting solid and restored in its old spot, up to the gallery where the beacon turned steady over Jeremy Creek and out toward the dark water beyond it. The tide moved the way it always had, indifferent and constant, and the light swept across it once, twice, marking nothing but itself, the way it had marked nothing but itself for my father for 33 years before me. I stood there a long while, 66 years old, widowed, and finally fully home. The light kept turning. I let it.